Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're really excited to have the concluding plenary panel now. We're going to have Alan Garber, Provost of the university, Amanda Claybaugh, who's the Dean of Undergraduate Education and Professor of English, Tsedal Neeley, Professor of Business Administration, and a recent author of The Digital Mindset, What It Really Takes to Thrive in the Age of Data. I want 5%. And this is moderated by Vice Provost for Advances in Learning, Bharat Anand. Welcome to the stage, everyone.
Good afternoon. I hope you've all had a really stimulating day. It's just been a fabulous day of conversations from my perspective. I'm particularly excited to share the stage with three colleagues who are on the front lines of the question we have for this afternoon's panel. What should Harvard's strategy be? We heard a lot about the technology of generative AI, the trajectory, what it's going to look like in several years, the use cases. This afternoon, we're going to shift focus a little bit and start to think about us as an institution, thinking about organizational action, individual action, change management, so to speak. I'm going to use all these like business school jargon buzzwords. Strategy, leadership, those are the topics for this afternoon, okay? And first of all, I'm just delighted that we have Amanda, Alan, and Tsedal join us because they literally cover a spectrum of responsibilities and expertise that I think will be really useful. So before we get started, I want to start out with a poll question. There's the QR code at the top. If you can take out your phones and just fill out this poll. And this builds on one of the questions or one of the observations this morning that came from the morning panel. Very interesting hypothesis or statement. And I really wanted to ask this as a poll question. Will those teachers who use AI replace those teachers who do not? All right, while we're waiting for the answers, I want to first just pick up on a topic that arose this morning, and I'm going to ask Amanda to kick us off, not in her role as Dean of Undergraduate Education, but in her capacity as a professor of English. We were talking about long-form essays and what is the future. As an English professor, how do you feel about this technology? And what do you see? And by the way, the vast majority of articles that came out when ChatGPT was introduced last year were really about, I mean, it affects many subjects, but really about the end of English. Do you agree or disagree?
So I think writing assignments need to be adapted. I think the person this morning who said the take-home essay is dead is probably correct. So writing assignments need to be adapted, but I think we already know how to do that adaptation. So one thing that you've been encouraging us to think about is how generative AI connects with some of the other topics that HILT has been thinking about over the years and other things we're concerned about. And it strikes me that many of the new pedagogies we have learned are the solution to generative AI. So the solution to the essay assignment is the scaffolded assignment, so that students are working step by step. And at a certain point, even if they're assisted by ChatGPT, they're still doing so much thinking through that process that they are learning from it. So I would say what's true about the essay, that it's under threat, but also we already know the pedagogical tools to address the threat, is true of assignments across the disciplines. And there too, the answers are things we know, like flipped classrooms.
Very interesting. By the way, there was an article last December, I think, in The Atlantic. It was by a high school teacher, English teacher, and the title of the article was "The End of High School English." You should read that. What you really should read is the follow-on article by the same author last month in The Atlantic, and the title was "High School English Needed a Makeover Before ChatGPT," to Amanda's point. And the same person is talking about how he has rethought what he does in the classroom, moving from writing to reading and spontaneous short essay writing, which then leads to more personalized voices, so to speak. I'd really encourage everyone to read both those articles. Do we have the poll responses? All right, this, by the way, clearly selection bias here, but that's very interesting. So we have sort of a split, almost a split audience. We'll come back to that. Amanda, you also oversee all of undergraduate education at Harvard College, which in some sense is the heart of what happens at Harvard. You have the most number of faculty across any school. What are you seeing in terms of the adoption of these tools in the classrooms or by faculty? What are you excited about in terms of what you're seeing, and what do you wish you would see more of?
So it was interesting to start this morning hearing about what HBS is doing, because the FAS is in many ways the exact opposite institutionally in all ways. And so
it was a very gentle.
My role here is that the FAS asked me to work with the Dean of Sciences, Chris Stubbs, to convene an FAS working group on this issue. And we have approached our work mindful of just the FAS's bedrock commitment to the idea that each faculty member has the prerogative to determine what they teach in their classroom and how they teach it. And we see that as the bedrock of academic freedom, but it has proven to be, fortunately, a kind of platform for innovation. Because, in fact, just to be clear, there was some confusion about this in some of the breakout rooms. The FAS does not have a default of forbidding this. The FAS has invited each faculty member to determine what policy they want to use in their class. So what I've seen that's really exciting is the use of ChatGPT, a chatbot designed for the CS50, our intro computer science class. And this is programmed to answer questions in the way that a course assistant would. It knows when to nudge. It knows where to refer you back to a lesson, a point in the lesson that you missed. It knows when you're just making a simple mistake, and actually it should just fix that for you, because it's not, there's not a deep learning problem going on. And so students have been using this AI course assistant very happily, and they've been using it much more often than they ever went to office hours. So I think that's a very exciting area of development. What I wish I would see more of is some deep reflection, and I think it has to be discipline by discipline, on what are the skills that are so fundamental that students still need to learn them, and still need to learn them through struggle, right? We talked about that in one of the breakout sessions. And which are the skills that are they're kind of lower level, and you might as well automate them through the AIs. I think the disciplines are going to have to come together and determine this for themselves.
That's really interesting. This point about heterogeneity across faculty and disciplines. And by the way, I want to turn to Tsedal to actually speak to that. Before we do that, we have, in the spirit of that, another poll question, which I'd love to have you fill out. Based on everything you've heard about or saw today, or listened to, what is one promising way to use generative AI in the classroom that you had not thought about earlier? And as you fill that out, we'll also just scroll the answers on the big screen. Tsedal, just to pick up on what Amanda was saying, what's interesting is early on, by the way, I have to confess my reaction to generative AI as it related to case-based teaching and learning was our pedagogical approach is basically Gen AI proof, because a lot of the assessments is class participation, yes, which is oral discussion. Since then, and partly thanks to Mitch, I've been thinking hard about how does this help student preparation, faculty preparation, case writing, and so on. You're heading, as part of your role, the Christensen Center, the Faculty Teaching and Learning Center at HBS. What are you seeing in terms of how this is playing out here at the school, and what can you share with us?
One of the things, first of all, the first poll, 58%, versus 42%, actually gives us hints around the question that you pose, in that there are so many differences among our faculty in terms of teaching experience or teaching efficacy, where they are on the learning curve in terms of being case teachers or having been here 3 to 5 years versus those who've been here much longer, and the extent to which they've been using Gen AI, they've been experimenting with it, the extent to which they're comfortable with Gen AI. So if you think of a 2x2, on the one side you have teaching experience. Every Harvard Business School professor, they don't bring up a 2x2, they're not legit. So I'm just trying to be legit. So on one axis is teaching experience. On the other side is generative AI influence, or how comfortable people are. And so depending on where you stand, there is how much you're willing to use it for yourself and for the classroom as well. Same thing with students. So we had a working group as well, where we assembled a group of faculty, teaching center experts, and a couple of very recent graduates, people who were in the classroom, to think about, well, what's it like for students? Because you have to understand students in order to serve them best. And there's heterogeneity among students as well, in terms of the level of experience with generative AI, interest, access, as well as how committed they are to their learning. So it's really, this is not monolithic by any means. And so we need to understand where we are, we need to understand where our students are in order to be most effective, and this is our conclusion. And we've mapped out a number of things based on these these axes I just described.
Yeah. One of the things, by the way, just looking at the list that folks are putting up, that's really interesting. I just noticed one saying, as a way to get students to increase their confidence, which,
you can see that.
Back to this morning, in terms of outcome measures, we talk about content mastery and we talk about X, Y, and Z, but confidence is a really interesting one. Just to stay, Tsedal, with that, you had students as part of this task force sprint group.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. How can we co-opt students to actually also help us co-create and co-think?
Co-create.
What did you learn from them?
First of all, it was extraordinary because some of them are digital natives, and they also went out and spoke to a number of students as well. So we were able to gather a lot of great information. So what have we learned? One, the heterogeneity piece. Second, access. So as part of our working group, we had to think a lot about inclusion and how to be as inclusive as possible so that no one is left behind. Third thing we learned is that the tech-savvy students, perhaps engineering degrees or some kind of technical background, are using these tools in a very advanced way. So they're leapfrogging in extraordinary ways. So we have to think about how do we level others up, given these tech-savvy students. And then finally, the fundamentals like critical thinking and even writing skills and oral communication skills continue to be crucial as we think about how we use these systems to really change how we teach. And this is the last thing I'll say on this. What we have learned is that with these systems, we shouldn't optimize fax machines. Do you see what I mean when I say that? Take something that needs to be fundamentally changed and slap on Gen AI on it. So we really need to think about, are there things that we need to restructure and really completely reconceptualize? And I think Ethan was trying to make this point as well this morning.
Love that metaphor. Bunch of issues I think both you and Amanda are raising I want to come back to, but it's not a good idea to keep the provost waiting, so let me just turn to Alan. Tsedal's sort of starting to talk about what's our mindset that we might want to adopt and thinking about changes institutionally. I want to use an analogy that came up this morning, online learning. 11 years ago, Harvard was instrumental. You were instrumental in developing, so to speak, the online education space through Harvard's investment in edX with MIT. And that had major follow-on effects. How should we think about an analogous role now, if at all? Is that the right way to think about what Harvard should be doing to exercise leadership in this space strategically?
Yeah, well, thank you, Bharat. And I just want to add my thanks to all the people who helped organize the conference today and to all of you for attending. And the first thing I would say is how we think about strategy at the university level when we have a very promising new technology whose implications are not yet fully understood is basically do what we can to unleash the creativity of our community. And I know from what I've heard of the talks today, there's a tremendous amount of that creativity in this room, and it's widely distributed throughout the university. And the one thing I can say with certainty is that how we're using these tools 5 years from now is going to be different from what we think today. And I think our experience with online learning is actually quite instructive in many ways. So some of you may have been here from the beginning of the HILT conferences, but when we had set up edX and we talked about this at the, I believe the first or second HILT conference, we made it clear that we had this new technology, although it wasn't really totally new, and people kept using the term disruption. I remember John Hennessy, the president of Stanford, saying there was going to be a tsunami. Well, it didn't turn out exactly the way that people predicted, and it was for a number of reasons. But when we got into edX, we actually were pretty clear about our goals, so that we didn't put the emphasis publicly where we might have privately. And let me be clear about what I mean by that. The goal of edX was, we would list number one, to provide access to the world's greatest teachers and the world's greatest courses, to everybody in the world with an internet connection. We pretty much did that in some form. The second goal was to conduct research to understand how to improve teaching and learning for everyone. We actually didn't do a lot of that, but the third thing, which was really important and was often omitted in our discussions, was to improve residential education. Now, when you have these broad goals to basically improve education for everyone in the world, you wonder why talk about improving residential education, especially among the elites who already have what's considered to be the world standard in the quality of residential education. But when we were having the internal discussions about putting a big investment in this area, and it started with conversations I had with the then Provost of MIT, Raphael Reif, what was really clear is that from the early experiences we'd had at Harvard with things like what's called Apple University, the YouTube-based stuff that we did, and we had all kinds of experiments in online courses, and MIT had open courseware. What we learned is that the people who participated very consciously improved their teaching. And these were in fields that didn't necessarily have a history of deep devotion to pedagogy. And in justifying our investment in this area, we had to talk about what the local return would be, what the local benefits would be, and that was to basically get people to re-examine how they teach. And that happened. You can talk about which way causality ran. There are a lot of things that happened at one time, but I have no doubt that our commitment in this area basically empowered the people, I believe, who always cared about pedagogy, but gave them a new set of tools to actually double down on this. And the fact that we're having this conference today, I think, is partly a reflection of that. To get to generative AI, I think this is another opportunity of that kind. I don't think we know exactly how we're going to use it. And it's easy to have a Panglossian view, which would be to say, this is going to provide all good for us and we're going to revolutionize how we teach in all these favorable ways, or a Cassandra-like view that is going to upend everything that we do. So first of all, it may not turn out to be quite as disruptive as people are saying, and that was our experience with online learning. I do believe it will be powerful, and it can be used in really good ways, but there will be a process to learn how that happens. And we'll talk about some other issues about its application. But I have to say that it may be that there are teachers who are successful without using AI, but there are entire fields where that will not be true.
Let me just pick up on a few things, Alan. So one, you were talking about the implications of that investment locally in terms of individual faculty rethinking what they do in the classroom. I will say there was another aspect of that, which was the organizational triggers across Harvard. And some of you have heard me say this, the edX investment, given that Harvard is so decentralized, forced, in some sense, every school to think about, are we on that bus? Are we on a different bus? And in some sense, if you trace literally the last decade of online investments, in my view, a lot of it goes back to that particular investment. Are you having a conversation with the provost of MIT today, or what is? What might that be about?
You know, actually, we are having conversations about this, about generative AI.
I didn't know that, by the way. This wasn't a setup.
But actually, this is one thing that's a little bit different from what happened with online learning. Harvard and MIT together could put together something that was really big. And presumably, I think probably at one point we were the second most used, et cetera, online learning platform for higher ed courses. When it comes to generative AI, it is diffused so quickly and in such a widely decentralized, distributed way that the goal now, I don't think any two universities are going to have a huge impact by themselves. And if they did not bring in others, they'd be missing out on a huge amount of the incredible work that people are doing, the imaginations of thousands of people who are putting a lot of effort into this. But there are ways that we will need to coordinate for sure, even though it's going to be a larger number of institutions and people. And just within the university, the reason we created a university-wide committee to deal with generative AI is that it was evident from day one that stuff was happening all around the university that everybody else would benefit from knowing about. So if we do nothing other than facilitate communication among the people who are out there checking out what they can accomplish with generative AI, if we did nothing else, I think that would be successful. And that's really our challenge as a university, is to basically harness the creativity and dedication of our community, and also to join with other academic communities in figuring out how to work with these tools.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, there's actually 3 committees being set up right now across the university. One is around generative AI for teaching and learning, one for research, and one for use in administrative processes, which is absolutely fascinating. And then the steering committee, which you chair with Meredith Wienik at the university.
Bharat chairs the teaching and learning committee.
I want to pick up on Alan's point about how do you unleash creativity. And Amanda, while you're thinking about that question, if I can just have folks, this is my last poll question of the day. What can Harvard do concretely? What is one thing that Harvard can do, in your view, to play a leadership role in using generative AI to elevate teaching and learning, either within our institution and or across higher education more broadly? Love to hear your thoughts. Amanda.
So one thing we're trying, and I think the Bach Center is taking the lead on this, and so I'm really excited about this, is we are focusing on the department level, partly for the intellectual reasons that the pedagogical needs vary by discipline, but also because people feel comfortable in a community with their colleagues they're already used to working with. And so we're going to have, the Bach Center is going to be offering trainings, like kind of 1 hour, 90-minute introductions to AI or second level advanced AI if it's a department that's more adept, and giving the departments the opportunity to customize for the things they're interested in learning. And the hope is that that will catalyze, if you get a bunch of people together in a room and having that experience that you gave us this morning of just watching it do its thing, and then you start, ideas start popping off in your head, that will then catalyze the department to start talking among themselves about next steps. So I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah, that's great. I love some of the ideas that are coming out. Humility, learning from others, sharing with others. By the way, the sharing with others is it's a huge design problem. Let me just put that out there, okay? There is so much being written about generative AI right now. If you're a faculty member, you're completely overwhelmed. And so the question is, how do we create a repository of resources that is relevant, curated, and real time? If anyone can figure out the answer to that problem, just let us know. But I love some of the ideas. Build a proprietary LLM. Okay, that's might take a little bit of investment there. Just Tsedal, from your perspective, at the sitting at the business school, and also partly your research, looking at other organizations and how they've actually tried to implement, integrate this. What is it we can learn?
So one is we have to make a distinction between AI that's enterprise-led versus generative AI, which is individuals who are using them, right? The cost for generative AI is much lower. So some of the things that you're seeing, some companies, some industries are very clear. Either we do this or we're going to be in trouble. So they're accelerating the implementation, learning what it is, putting together task forces, hiring data scientists and other groups in order to move forward with their implementation. Others are very nervous. So the banning of you can't use AI or generative AI is true in many places, but the problem is there's this term called shadow use, where individuals are using them anyway on their phones or even in their home PCs. The problem with that is that you don't learn, you don't have guidelines for responsible use of AI. Not just some of the bias issues that were raised this morning, which are very important to consider, but also unwittingly putting private information in the public sphere. For hallucinations. And what do? There has to be guidelines around those. Triangulation, meaning using different systems to verify your work, is an important means. I was teasing Mitch earlier how he was toggling. Did you all notice that? He like toggled across like 5 Gen AI systems. You saw that, right? Mm-hmm. Only Mitch does that, just so you know. That's not a standard for all of us, but triangulation is sometimes you use 2 or 3 in order to verify certain facts, some information, et cetera. That's important to do. So without those guidelines, companies that are banning people from using it, there's just a lot of ad hoc, and you can unwittingly get yourself in trouble. Or your organization, that's a concern. Boards are demanding for their organizations to think about this, to implement it. And there are 2 reasons why organizations typically change. One is if there's a performance gap. There's performance issues we need to change in order to thrive. The second reason is what we call opportunity gap. If we don't do this thing, we won't be able to seize these opportunities that our competitors are seizing. So the opportunity gap is getting felt by many organizations. And the last piece on this is whether this is smooth or not at organizations depends on the top leaders. Are they tech savvy or not? Do they have a digital mindset or not? Are they learning or not? So we have to push our leaders to have a digital mindset to help lead us into this new space that I think is inevitable.
Yeah, great. By the way, while some of these responses are coming up, I just want to call out a couple folks as well. On the question of content repository for just surfacing ideas and interesting use cases around AI in the classroom, I loved what Jeffrey and then later Sarah in one of the breakout rooms were talking about AI pedagogy. Is that aipedagogy.org? Is that? Yes. Great. aipedagogy.org. Okay, we're going to come back to that later. And the other is just on the question of disruption, sort of to what extent might this actually change things in ways that Justin Reich, who was here, where's Justin? Is he here? Justin from MIT, talking about the lessons learned from the last decade with online learning. Failure to Disrupt was the title of the book. Anand, let me come back to you. This issue of equity and inclusion is coming up actually quite a bit. One of the unintended, and it came up in one of the breakout rooms, one of the unintended or perhaps unexpected outcomes from the free online education project, the MOOC project, so to speak, was the high degree of correlation between course completers and degree of education already earned. Meaning a large fraction of those who were completing the MOOCs already had college degrees, right? Which is not, I think, necessarily what you might think if you're thinking about free online courses with high quality for the world. How should Harvard think about equity in this space, inclusion in this space for, folks who might not have access?
So thanks, Bharat. We were very aware that although edX was created to essentially democratize education, the heaviest users were, as Bharat said, people who already had advanced degrees. Now, I have to say, this was not as mistargeted as it may sound, because it turns out a lot of the users, the completers, were people who were actually teaching. Mm-hmm. So heavy usage was, for example, by high school teachers and some teachers at the college level who were updating their knowledge of the field, staying on the cutting edge. So it had this kind of follow-on effect, maybe you call it a second-generation effect, to get to some of the people who we mainly targeted. Nevertheless, we did keep asking ourselves the question, could we do better? So I think you all know that we sold edX, and as it happened, it was at the peak of the market for ed tech. And we created a new nonprofit. And here, I just have to give a shout out to Bharat. There were people who criticized the sale who I don't think had any understanding of its details. But the purchaser, 2U, agreed to a set of terms that required them to basically do all of the things that edX did, including having free courses. And Bharat spent days actually pushing through this negotiation to ensure that we actually stayed true to the original mission of edX through this transaction. But in addition, we created a new nonprofit, which I'm sure you all know about. It's now called AXIM, which is really dedicated to addressing educational inequities. And now that was just created, I guess, 2 years ago at this point. It's actually only been in operation for less than 2 years. We've had a CEO for less than a year, the permanent CEO for less than a year.
I think she's in the room, so.
A shout out to Stephanie Karana.
Like that.
And the thing about AXIM is it arrives at a time when we have a new wave of technological change. And one of the things that we've talked about as we think about what kinds of activities we'll support is what do we do about generative AI? And Stephanie could tell all of you about some of the ideas that we're thinking about pursuing that are in various degrees of being implemented. But the one thing I think is really important, and I'm thinking here about Amanda and teaching English and so on. A major challenge is, in my view, in education at the elementary, secondary levels, is teaching writing. Mm-hmm. And the teaching of writing is inherently extraordinarily labor intensive. And I remember when I was teaching my freshman seminar, and my daughter was home, and my daughter was teaching high school. And I was talking about the variability in the students' writing skills. This is a Harvard freshman seminar, okay, and high variability. And she asked me, did you notice where they went for high school? And so then I looked back at the class, and when they apply, those of you who teach freshman summers know, they have to apply and you have their high schools. And there's almost a perfect correlation between whatever you want to call it, prestige or quality of the high school, and the quality of the writing. And it's pretty obvious why that's true. To teach writing well requires great resources. Well, I'm sure you spoke about this today. There's a lot of efforts to incorporate generative AI into teaching. And AXIM, we've spoken with Sal Khan, for example, with Khanmigo, which is doing some really interesting things, incorporating ChatGPT into guiding students through Khan Academy, and so on. But the point is, if you want to revolutionize access, and if you want to revolutionize teaching for students who don't have access to vast amounts of resources in areas like teaching writing, this new technology may offer us the greatest promise that we've ever had to dramatically improve teaching in settings where you simply can't say, we're going to have teachers spend twice as many hours grading papers and so on.
Just to foreshadow, so AXIM, by the way, there's Stephanie Korana, Philip Schmidt, both there. 2 months from now, is it? November? Organizing a conference, Harvard, MIT, with AXIM on equitable use and access of generative AI. Sal Khan's going to be here in Sanders Theater. Besides that being the showstopper, there'll be a lot of conversation around these issues, so I'd encourage everyone to join in. Before we turn to questions, and I'd just love to hear from everyone, questions for our panelists. Maybe 1.5 questions, and I'd love to draw all of you in. technology fatigue. We had online, we had COVID, now generative AI. Sort of it's like these waves coming, right? How do we support faculty, staff, students? And to what extent it feels like almost every conversation that we're having today about teaching and learning is about generative AI. Is there a sense in which this might be crowding out or taking the air out of other conversations we should be having in teaching and learning?
I think a lot about the fatigue, putting on my administrator hat, because I think the MOOC moment was an opt-in, right? And so the faculty who were very excited about it did it. The remote education was, everyone, it was very intensive, but we all thought it was a once in a lifetime thing. And now 3 years later, we're all having to confront another exogenous shock. And I don't think it's over. So I think we're doing a lot of thinking about how to sort of streamline the process of noticing something is on the horizon that all of our instructors are going to have to think about, and then how to kind of make the work with the instructors to be as kind of efficient and low profile as possible, because I think we're just going to be in a continuous cycle with this. I would imagine that going forward, every year or so, there's going to be some new thing we're going to have to learn about in order to improve our teaching. And so we really need to find a way to make that just routinely part of our work.
I think we have to fall in love with technology. I think remote work, remote learning, hybrid learning, and now generative AI are inextricably tied. To me, this is part of what digital is, and digital work and digital learning is. And this is where the world is. And we are, I think, a kind of pivotal moment where this is going to be the future. And if we think about our students from undergraduate even to professional school students here, average age about 27, these are all digital natives, right? And so learning is changing, the world is changing. And if we really think about the BCG study that Ethan mentioned earlier, the workplace is going to change radically as well. Because ultimately what generative AI is doing is it's lowering the cost of cognition. And so I was trained, I grew up in the world where I did my doctorate at the Center for Work Technology and Organizations at Stanford. And everything that we're seeing is actually could have been predicted. All of this was coming, right? And so we need to have digital mindsets, always on message, as you know, and have this continuous learning type of attitude, because we have to be worthy of our students. We have to prepare them for a world that they're going to, which is going to be very different. We today at the business school need to worry about our next wave of graduates. What kind of workplaces will they be in? How can they contribute? How can they have not only the skills, but the mindsets in order to thrive in those environments? But what we know is from history, technological revolutions create more jobs than they destroy, but whole new paradigms are around the corner. So I think we all need to learn, be hungry, and engage so that we can support our students and even alums with this major transition.
Thank you. Let's open it up for questions. By the way, one thing I do want to add, though, is several ideas or suggestions about how can Harvard provide access to faculty, staff, students to use these tools. This is coming, actually it's already started. There's a sandbox environment, a private environment for using multiple LLMs that's been created by Harvard right now, that's being tested. Thanks to Clara Yelenkova, Emily Bodice, the Hewitt team, I don't know if you guys are there. Big shout out, thank you. So this is being pressure tested right now over the next month or so by people across the university. It's being used by about 800 students as well. And this will likely be rolled out to all of Harvard pretty soon. So lots to come there. But let's open it up to questions. So let's see, there's one right there, if we can get the mic.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I feel lucky I'm the first one. My name is Uchenna, a student at the Hoswe. and it's a wonderful conference. I came twice here to make sure I'm here today. So my question is, I think the conversation around AI is beautiful, but I'm also worried that it's slow. I mean, as educators, we take time to do things, research. But from my worries, how can we go from being worried about disruption of AI to being curious of the positive things and be fast about it? Because as the day goes by, things are rolling out all the time. So how can educators be fast about being acquainted with AI, especially the generative AI? Thank you.
Amanda, do you want to speak to that? I love that about moving from fear to curiosity, or?
I think fear to curiosity is a beautiful trajectory, and I really appreciate your approach, Tsedal. I'm going to say a slightly contradictory thing here, which is a thing that is very frustrating is that the university moves slowly. Right? I mean, so all institutions move slowly, but the university really moves slowly. And it is, in fact, built to move slowly. It is built to be a small c conservative institution, right?
One of our colleagues says that universities are a force for inertia.
Yes, yes. And so I spend sort of 90% of my day banging my head against that fact. And I'm trying to spend the other 10% of my day thinking about the value of that kind of institution. And because I do see there are booms and busts out in the world, and we see this in the business world where people are able to pivot quicker. Sometimes they pivot to the wrong thing. So I'm trying to think about this as an opportunity for us to think about what it is, what values we want to conserve. Right? So rather than saying, I think if we were a for-profit institution, we might say, the paper is dead, ChatGPT will write it for you instead. And I think we're seeing a lot of online journalism go in that direction. They're firing their writers and just having ChatGPT do it instead. But we're able to say, no, slow down. There are important forms of intellectual training that go into the creation of arguments through language, whether they're spoken or written, and we are going to find a way to hold on to those. So I'm trying to leverage the conservative side of the institution because it is never going away.
There's a lovely quote: will the classroom of the future be a child being stuffed with facts while he or she sits at home? That was from 1924, when the radio came along, to underscore the point about inertia. And by the way, you saw this, right? I mean, it was lovely and intoxicating to hear some of our colleagues in the morning talking about, we have got to be on this. And yet 42% of the folks in this room think there will be a future with teachers who are not using Gen AI. So it's I think, just speaks to your point.
Can I add something to this? I think before we can even judge it, so I'm appealing to the 42% here. You have to really use it, spend time with it, and then judge it. So what we've done is we've done a series of trainings and workshops here at the business school, and part of it is requiring people to spend hours upon it so that you can truly understand what it can do, its limitations, et cetera. So suspend judgment until you've spent a minimum of 10 to 20 hours with it is the advice. And that will move you from fear to at least insights. Yeah. Hopefully it'll shift over time.
And 3 sleepless nights.
Yeah. Well, yes. Yes.
Yeah, look, I think this is a great question. But it's important to keep in mind that there are decisions that need to be made very quickly and some that should be made with a lot of deliberation. And in fact, the policies within FAS, other schools, and in the university actually have adopted an approach that says some things you've got to take care of right away. So an example of that type of issue is protecting privacy, making sure that people don't inadvertently expose confidential information, personal or institutional. You have to act quickly. For other things, like the university cannot offer every single generative AI platform for the community. We have to pick out which ones really matter. And here I've got to give a shout out to Clara and her team, who have done a lot of work to figure out what are the most important tools for us to offer. And I guess this is public information, and if not, please keep this confidential. But when you talk about putting in something
with
like
500 people,
Microsoft Copilot, and making that available to our community or any other enterprise, it's actually really, really expensive. So you can't just say, we're going to let 1,000 flowers bloom and we will pay for everybody to use these. You know, you've got to get volume discounts, you know the drill. So you have to approach things at an appropriate pace for the question at hand. But the one thing I would say is that it's not, there are companies where it can be an executive decision to decide where we're going to place our bet. Our strength is that we have expertise distributed throughout the community, and it takes longer to actually marshal that expertise, but we actually end up making much better decisions when we do. So that's the trade-off we face.
excellent. I want to get a few more questions, and by the way, I'm going to have a slight tweak to that. A question is no longer than 30 seconds, an answer is no longer than 30 seconds as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you for taking my question. I come from the engineering school, and I'm going to take us just a couple steps backwards. SEAS has some ethics courses, STS, Society, Technology, Science, Technology, and Society, but the engineering students don't have a required curriculum in ethics other than the gen ed requirement. Are we at Harvard and other institutions going to just wait till the next curveball? That this one is lovely, and I'm very hopeful, and from an educational point of view, I feel like there's a lot of opportunities. But should we also take a few steps back and think of what we're teaching our future engineers and scientists that are going to throw the next lovely curveball in our faces?
Yeah, so I would echo, I think it was Ethan this morning who said ethics is a really capacious term in these conversations. So I don't think that what our students need is an ethics education. I think what they need is a liberal arts education, right? Because all of the disciplines, economics tells us something about what happens when labor gets automated. Sociology tells us about something when work patterns change. All of our disciplines have something to contribute to understanding the impact of AI on society. And the arts and all of that. And so I would say that we need to be encouraging our students to not just think of this as a tool, but as one that they will learn to think about from many disciplinary angles.
Since I feel like I'm on Jeopardy, I will make sure this is in the form of a question. So what are your thoughts about what I've heard some today and in general about what seems like the amplifying effect of Gen AI around trust? Trust in what students, the quality and veracity of what students produce, trust in the integrity of researchers, if that's not too sensitive to say around here, and trust in all the information that we receive every day. What's our role internally and externally?
All I can say is that we've had a real challenge that's not new about how we assess truth, how we assess the quality of evidence. It's gotten a lot harder, but actually we also have better tools to help because of the availability of good information. And our task is to make sure that our students know how to find out, have the methodological tools and access to sources of good information to actually verify truths. That's obviously more important now than ever.
Great, right here.
Hi, thank you for your time. My question is related, we know that the data came from rich countries, how we can close that gap from low and middle income countries, and how can Harvard help the academia to facilitate more equitable knowledge ecosystems as well?
Let me just say, one reason I don't know how to answer your question is, to train a new LLM is at a level of investment that universities alone typically can't make. To fine-tune a model is a different issue, and then it comes down to access to the information. You're raising a great question. We actually do have a lot of information at our disposal, also working with peer institutions that we may be able to pursue that. But there remain unanswered questions. about what resources will really be needed to pull that off. It's a great goal to have.
I mean, just to underscore a sort of version of that question, when we think about equity, the first instinct is to think about price access or financial access. But there's an important point here about if the training data is based on certain geographies, that is a fundamental barrier, which has nothing to do with price. So, yeah. Questions? Anyone else?
How or should we consider the way we evaluate applications to our programs in the age of generative AI? The personal statement, should it get the same amount of weight it used to, more weight, less weight, interviews for programs that have those?
So I thought that my colleague Jeffrey Schnott made an excellent point earlier today about, I used the phrase arguments made in language, and he talked about how there's a balance between do we value the written or the oral more or less. And I think he's right. I think we're heading into an era where the oral is going to become more important, and not just as plagiarism detection or whatever, but because the oral skills are important, right? So they're worth teaching. So I would say, my reading of the New York Times leads me to believe that I would not put a lot of weight right now in those essays. And so I think we probably are going to move to interviews.
Welcome, alumni.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me paraphrase the article I mentioned. High school English needed a makeover before ChatGPT. Maybe admissions essays needed a makeover before ChatGPT.
Yes.
All right, any other questions?
I think we've talked a lot today about sort of, I guess, the skilling up across students and thinking about equity of access across students. And it feels like there are sort of resources, but a lot of this is sort of being deployed across departments to sort of focus on the use cases of generative AI within their disciplines. I'm curious to what extent you think the use of generative AI is going to sort of become its own disciplinary area of itself, of like how can students, should this be a general focus of the university? How can students be using this on their own within the classroom, outside of the classroom? And to what extent, I guess, these sort of skills and outputs are worthy of its own sort of consideration outside of within any given disciplinary box?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this response is loosely held because things are changing so fast. But the belief is that this prompt engineering, which is now important, right? Your prompts will help you produce, and your probing and going back reprompting will help you produce great answers. That belief is changing because these LLMs, these systems, are getting even better, so much so that the prompts are mattering less and less. So the belief is that over time, these systems are improving such that it'll be much easier to use them. And adoption will be as simple as Google searches. That's the belief over time. And so for that reason, it doesn't seem like there needs to be concentrated focus and curriculum built around that. That actual usage is going to get better and better. So with more practice, with more incorporating and integrating more advanced uses will become actually more and more commonplace.
If I could make a quick comment on that. About 6 months ago, I was in East Asia and met with the CEO of a gaming company. And I asked him how generative AI is changing their work. And he said his engineers were all using ChatGPT, and that it took them about 1/6 as much time to code when they used it, and with fewer mistakes, by the way. So my guess is in certain fields, this will be integrated into our educational programs. And we will always be pushing the limits of what the technology can offer. So I don't know exactly how that's going to change education, but I am confident that people are going to care less and less about how good a software engineer you are without assistance, and much more about how well you can use these tools to produce great code.
On that note, I just wanted to thank you all, Amanda, Alan, Tsedal, for joining us, taking the time out. And I wanted to thank everyone here for just participating in really what's been a pretty incredible day of conversations today. The question I had asked about what is the one thing you've learned today that you might not have thought about before you walked in this morning, I'll share my answer with you. It's not about something that happened today, but a few weeks ago. There's a paper called Using ChatGPT for Consumer Research, written by 3 authors. One of them is one of our colleagues here. It exploits the property that LLMs are probabilistic, meaning when you submit a prompt, you get an answer, like Mitch was doing. If you submit the same prompt 10 times, the answer is not always the same. You might get 10 different answers, and you can vary something called the temperature parameter. What they did was use this property to try and forecast demand in a market, basically saying if you have X amount of income, here's the price of Crest, here's the price of Colgate. Let's ask that question 300 times. You get 300 data points. They calibrated the demand they got from that synthetic data with real-world data, and it matched beautifully.
Wow.
And by the way, the last line of the paper says this entire process took less than 1 hour and less than $10. And the implications of that for several fields, market research, focus groups, and so on, is large. I hope you're walking away today with one idea that's different from when you walked in this morning. And I hope you think about one action that you can do that's different from when you walked in this morning. I would underscore the fact that so many people were talking about just try it for yourself. Use it, experiment with it, you will learn from it. On that note, I just want to thank everyone again who helped organize this conference. Dustin, over to you to close.
Thank you. What another lovely conversation, much to chew on. Thank you all for spending your time. I know you're all super busy. And thanks to all of you for coming, to spending this day with us. One of the things that Aaron Driver-Lynn, who is the faculty director of HILT, or the director of HILT before I stepped in the role, really emphasized was that this is a community, but the community doesn't stop here. So when you go home tonight, talk about this stuff with your spouse, your parents, your kids. Keep the conversation going. That through that conversation is where we're going to figure out all of these nuances. Where are we going? How fast should we go? Should we go there? All of these are questions for us to deliberate on, and we can do it assisted by some of these tools. But this is a conversation, and it's going to be here with us whether we like it or not. So again, have a great day, beautiful afternoon outside. Enjoy your day. Thank you.